The training moon hung like a dull silver coin over the academy grounds when the shuttle touched down near the cave rim and the alien cadets filed out in a tense cluster, armor plates glinting under the floodlights. The air here was colder than on the main campus, thin and metallic, flavored with dust that clung to mouths and nostrils. The ground under their boots rang faintly with every step, a reminder that hollow stone yawned beneath the crust. Instructors waited in a straight line near the cave entrance, silent and unmoving, their posture formal in the half-dark. The human cadet, a tall boy named Marcus, stood among the aliens and tried not to stare at the cave mouth for longer than anyone else. He had trained for months to reach this point, and he refused to let his nerves show when this was his first real field trial with the alien cohort. The entrance to the cave was a jagged split in the rock, framed by sharp basalt teeth. Inside, faint bioluminescent markers pulsed along the walls, like a string of distant stars pulled into the stone. Marcus watched the glow shift rhythmically, a programmed guide the cadets had been told to trust. One of the instructors stepped forward, a tall insectoid officer whose mandibles clicked softly as she spoke, her words translated into the cadets' earpieces. She explained the rules with crisp precision. The team would enter as a group, follow the glowing markers, locate the central chamber, retrieve a beacon, and then return by a different route. The environment inside would be uncontrolled: loose stone, echo distortions, temperature drops, and native fauna. Most of these cadets had grown up under domes, in controlled environments where shadows never stretched too far and the temperature never slipped below comfort levels. The cave was the opposite of that, and this was intentional. Marcus tugged once on his harness, feeling the fabric bite against his shoulders. Around him, the alien cadets rustled and shifted. A scaled girl named Shira rolled her shoulders and exhaled a thin line of vapor into the cold air, her crest flattening nervously before she forced it upright again. A broad-shouldered, deep blue cadet named Vec flexed his long fingers, pretending he was unbothered. The flicker of his throat sacs betrayed his tension. Marcus listened to the instructor's final warning: no live weapons, no external comms, and no returning to the surface except through the designated exit. The trial would be observed through internal sensors and thermal scans, but no one would intervene unless a cadet's life was genuinely at risk. You will discover, the instructor concluded through the translator, whether you trust your training or your fear. Marcus felt his heart beat faster, but he also felt something else, a prickling anticipation. On Earth, caves had fascinated him. Dark, damp, crawling with life burrowed into stone, they were the opposite of the open sky, yet somehow just as vast. On the journey to the academy world, he had spent long hours reading about this moon's geology and its odd ecology. He knew, in abstract terms, that the darkness here was not empty. The aliens around him, however, spoke in hushed tones about old stories. Cadets who had failed the cave trial, who had panicked and lost all sense of direction, who had been guided out only by rescue teams and debriefed for weeks afterward. Failure here stained a cadet's record for cycles. Shira glanced at Marcus and tried a tight smile, her vertical pupils narrowing. "You are ready for this?" she asked, her voice filtered through the translator but still carrying a trembling undertone. Marcus nodded once. "As ready as I can be." He fought the urge to say more, to joke or reassure her. Humor sometimes fell flat across species lines here, so he kept his words simple and steady. The signal came from the instructors, a hand raised, then lowered. The markers inside the cave brightened fractionally, like a throat clearing before a speech. One by one, the cadets stepped forward, boots crunching on gravel as they crossed from harsh floodlight into soft, eerie luminescence. Marcus stepped through the threshold near the middle of the line, feeling the temperature drop around him like a curtain of cold water. The outside sounds, distant drones, instructors' faint footsteps, the hum of the shuttle, cut off abruptly as the stone swallowed everything. Ahead, the tunnel narrowed, carved by ancient water that had long since retreated. The bioluminescent markers gleamed in a dotted line along the walls and ceiling, pale blue and green, pulsing with a slow heartbeat rhythm. It should have been reassuring, a clear path in the dark. Instead, the glow only emphasized how deep the blackness was beyond that thin line of light. The cadets' personal lamps had been disabled for the trial. Their suits hummed softly with internal readings, but those displays were kept dim to force them to use the environment instead of tech. As the group advanced, the entrance behind them shrank into a distant, jagged frame of silver daylight. The last hints of surface light vanished around a bend, replaced entirely by the cave's own faint glow. Marcus listened to the sound of the team, claws scratching on stone, hooves tapping lightly, soft pads making almost no noise at all. Each species moved differently, but all shared the same underlying tension. Vec muttered something in his own language, and the translator turned it into a low complaint about the cold and how this moon smelled wrong. Shira shushed him, though her own claws flexed nervously. Marcus said nothing. He focused on the rhythm of his breathing, counting steps in his head, mapping the turns in his mind. Left past the broken pillar, right at the narrow passage with 3 ceiling cracks. He had no guarantee the route would matter, but he felt safer having a mental trail. The tunnel floor dipped and rose unpredictably, forcing the cadets to slow down. At one point, the ceiling lowered so abruptly that the tallest cadet had to crouch. Moisture gathered in shallow depressions, reflecting the marker glow in tiny broken mirrors. The air felt heavier, saturated with mineral smells and a faint organic tang. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped with maddening irregularity. The echoes twisted those drops into distant footsteps and phantom whispers. A smaller cadet stumbled and caught herself against the wall with a sharp hiss. Her hand brushed an outcrop, and the bioluminescent marker there flared brighter for a heartbeat, reacting to the touch. A nervous giggle rippled through the group, quickly swallowed by embarrassed silence. The instructors had warned them. The markers were sensitive to physical contact and energy fields. The glow was meant to remain just bright enough to follow, but not bright enough to wash away the shadows. As the team continued deeper, the cave widened into a high chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness above the faint halo of light. Here, the markers spread along multiple branching tunnels, forming a skeletal map of possible paths. The lead cadet hesitated, looking between the glowing lines and the faint airflow that stirred his face. Marcus felt the shift in mood immediately. The group's confidence, thin as it was, wavered. Voices overlapped as cadets suggested different routes, argued about which one matched the briefing diagram, insisted that the left tunnel smelled safer or the right tunnel sounded less hollow. The acoustic distortion turned every word into a murmur that seemed to come from all directions at once. The lead cadet finally chose the central tunnel, the one with the most intense glow. It felt like the obvious choice, and obvious choices in training scenarios often hid traps, but no one wanted to stand in this cavern and argue any longer. The unknown behind them was beginning to feel as threatening as the unknown ahead. Marcus filed in with the others, eyeing the side tunnels as they passed. One exhaled cold air with a smell like iron. Another seemed utterly silent, its markers dimmer and spaced wider apart. He wondered what lay down those paths and whether any team had ever chosen them and still passed. The central tunnel sloped downward in a slow, relentless curve. The glow of the markers took on a slightly different hue, greener, somehow more unnatural. Marcus noted the change, filing it away for later, but said nothing. The cadence of footsteps began to fall out of sync as cadets shifted their pace. The lines stretched thinner, front and rear drifting apart. Echoes warped distances, so that someone who was only a meter behind sounded as if he walked far down another corridor. The human's skin prickled with awareness. Instructors had mentioned acoustic illusions, but experiencing them was different from reading about them. He checked the faint indicator on his wrist, still picking up the entire team's biosigns within close range. The tech would warn him if someone actually fell behind or surged too far ahead. That did not change how lonely the tunnel suddenly felt. The first real sign of trouble came as a subtle flicker at the edge of vision. Marcus saw it in the corner of his eye. One marker, then another, dimming for half a breath, then returning to normal. At first he thought it was fatigue, his eyes adjusting poorly to the constant low light. Then Shira spoke up, her voice tight. "Did the lights just—" She broke off, unwilling to finish the sentence. Silence followed, then a nervous laugh from further ahead, insisting it had been nothing. The tunnel continued. Water seeped from the ceiling in thin ribbons, glistening as it fell past the glowing dots. The sound of dripping grew louder, and the air temperature dropped another few degrees. Marcus's breath puffed white in front of him. He hugged his arms in closer to his chest, more to feel grounded than for warmth. The flicker returned, longer this time, unmistakable. An entire section of markers ahead of the group went dim for a heartbeat, plunging that stretch of tunnel into absolute black, before the glow stuttered back to life in a ragged sequence, like a line of candles relit by an unseen hand. This time, no one tried to pretend nothing had happened. The cadets slowed to a halt, unsure whether moving forward was wise if the guides failed. Someone from the back shouted a question, and the echo turned it into a distorted roar. Another cadet snapped at him to lower his voice. The tension in the air thickened, all sharp edges and shallow breaths. The lead cadet called out that the markers were probably recalibrating, that the system was old, that tests always had quirks. He tried to sound authoritative, but his own crest was pressed flat, and the translator could not hide the quaver in his tone. Marcus swallowed and forced himself to study the walls instead of joining the anxious murmurs. The rock here was darker, smoother, as though something had melted and cooled it ages ago. The markers were embedded shallowly, not painted or attached. Something about that felt important, but he could not yet name why. Before he could think it through, the tunnel lurched into chaos. Without warning, every marker in sight flared white-hot bright, so bright that Marcus's pupils slammed shut, and several cadets cried out, clutching at their faces. The light held for a single agonizing second, then vanished. Not dimmed, vanished. The tunnel dropped into pure, suffocating darkness, so complete that Marcus could not see his hand in front of his face. The absence of light felt physical, pressing against eyes and skin. Someone screamed, high and sharp. Another cadet gasped that her vision was gone. A third began babbling into the darkness, calling names without direction, voice bouncing off the stone until it sounded like a chorus of panicked strangers. All the training about controlled breathing and calm assessment tore loose and scattered under the instinctive terror that came with absolute black. Marcus felt his heart slam against his ribs, the urge to turn and run almost overwhelming. His inner ear told him he stood still, yet the echo of shifting feet made it sound as if the world slid under him. The cave, which had moments ago been a strange but manageable environment, now felt like a living thing that had snapped its teeth shut around the team. Somewhere behind him, a cadet began to hyperventilate, breaths coming in rapid, ragged bursts. Shira's voice cut through the shouting, higher than usual, calling for everyone to stay together, but the sound of her own panic undermined her words. The lead cadet tried to reassert control, barking orders that no one could see to follow. The acoustic distortions turned commands into overlapping noise. Feet scuffed against stone as cadets shuffled blindly, afraid to move too much, more afraid of standing still. Marcus stood in the middle of the forming chaos, surrounded by breathing and fear and unseen bodies, staring into the dark that had swallowed not only the tunnel, but also the one thing the instructors had told them to trust. The bioluminescent markers were gone. The path was gone. For the first time since stepping off the shuttle, he felt a cold spike of genuine fear, sharp and clean, cutting through the academic confidence he had carried into the trial. The cave test had truly begun. The moment the darkness swallowed the last fragments of glowing blue, panic spread through the group like a spark racing across dry grass. The voices around Marcus rose and tangled until he could no longer separate one cadet's fear from another's. He heard a scraping sound to his right, then a thud as someone slipped on uneven stone. A hiss of pain followed, sharp and panicked. Marcus reached out instinctively, but his fingers met only cold air. The absence of any visible shape made the air feel enormous and empty, as though the cave had stretched infinitely while his eyes were closed. When he blinked, he saw nothing but heavier darkness pressing against his eyelids. The cadets around him were abandoning all attempts at discipline. One cadet shouted that the ground was shifting under him. Another insisted that something had brushed her arm. A third muttered frantically about creatures that lived in cave hollows, creatures that hunted by sound, creatures that preferred moving in darkness as complete as this. Marcus forced himself to breathe slowly, but each inhale tasted metallic, and the air felt staler as the group's fear thickened. A trembling hand brushed his sleeve. Shira's voice followed a heartbeat later, thin and shaking. "Marcus, are you here? Say something, please." Her words shuddered in the air, catching on breaths that were too shallow to steady herself. He answered quietly, "I'm here. I'm not far from you." He kept his tone soft, hoping it would calm her instead of echoing wildly into the cavern. The wrong volume could twist into something monstrous in these tunnels. He heard her exhale, a trembling sound of relief. She moved closer, fingers gripping the edge of his sleeve until she found his arm. Her hand tightened around it as if she feared the darkness might steal him if she let go. Marcus did not mind. He welcomed the contact. At least it confirmed one real point in this chaos. Somewhere ahead, the lead cadet tried again to impose order. His voice cracked on the first command, then steadied with visible effort. "Everyone needs to stay still. No running. No shouting. Just breathe." His words wavered but held enough authority to momentarily quiet some of the louder cadets. A few of them obeyed, falling into uneasy silence. Others muttered breathless prayers or fumbled with disabled lamps, forgetting the rules of the trial in their desperation. Marcus heard the soft click of metal against metal as one cadet smacked a lamp module repeatedly against his wrist plate, certain he could force it back on. The cave returned only the hollow, mocking echo of his attempts. The air changed slowly, becoming thicker, heavier, as though the cave exhaled a cold mist. Marcus straightened, sensing the shift. The temperature drop was subtle but steady. The cold wrapped around him, creeping into the seams of his uniform, sliding along the sensitive skin of his throat. Shira noticed it too. He felt her shiver against his arm. From the back of the group came a rising whimper, building until it cracked into a full cry. Marcus recognized the voice. A younger cadet, a girl with pale membranes along her jaw, still new to field training. Her breathing escalated into frantic gasps that echoed back, swollen and distorted. Her panic made the darkness feel alive. The sound triggered other fears. Someone shouted for her to stop screaming. Another cadet snapped at the first, accusing him of making things worse. A sharp clatter followed as two armored forms collided blindly. The cave amplified every sound until it felt like the whole tunnel shook with their panic. Marcus stepped slightly forward, keeping Shira's hand firmly around his arm. "Everyone needs to stay calm," he said, loud enough to be heard but not so loud that the echoes overwhelmed his words. "No one is alone in here." No one answered. The silence that followed was worse than the chaos, unnatural, expectant, like the darkness itself paused to listen. Then a distant rumble rolled through the stone under their feet. The floor vibrated for a heartbeat, then settled again. The tremor was minor, but it cut through any sense of stability the group still held. Several cadets screamed. Shira tensed so suddenly that her claws pressed painfully into Marcus's sleeve. "It's a structural shift," someone shouted. "The cave's collapsing." "It's not," another cadet countered, though his voice cracked with fear. "It was nothing. Just an echo. Just nothing." Marcus knew neither of them could see enough to confirm anything, but he recognized that rumble. He had read that the deeper caverns experienced occasional pressure shifts as underground vents exchanged pockets of warmer air for colder drafts. Nothing dangerous, no collapse, just a natural cycle. But convincing anyone of that now would be nearly impossible. The fear continued to rise like flooding water. Someone bolted. Marcus heard the sprinting footsteps, quick, uneven, reckless. Then came a scream as the cadet crashed into a wall or protruding stone. The sound reverberated through the cavern, bouncing again and again until no one could pinpoint its direction. The lead cadet shouted, begging everyone to stay put. His voice trembled, the command losing its edge as the panic of others infected him. Shira squeezed Marcus's arm harder, her breaths quickening. "We need to move," she whispered. "We can't stay here. Something is wrong." "We don't know the terrain," Marcus said. "If we move too fast, we might fall. Or we might split up worse than we already have." She swallowed hard. "If we stay here, the group will tear itself apart." Marcus wished he could deny that. But the way the echoes twisted screams into grotesque shapes, the way every trembling voice fed into another, made him realize she was right. Standing still in absolute darkness was its own danger. A sudden scuttling noise shivered through the tunnel like claws scraping stone. Every cadet froze, some gasped, others whimpered. The sound came from somewhere ahead or behind. It was impossible to tell. It lasted only a moment, but it struck every cadet with primal terror. "It's the fauna!" someone cried hysterically. "Something is here!" Marcus strained to listen, searching for a second sound. He heard nothing except accelerated breathing, his own and everyone else's. The silence that followed was heavy and trembling, like a held breath before disaster. Then someone whispered too loudly, "We shouldn't be here. This test is wrong. This is too deep. The instructor sent us into the wrong section." The whisper twisted into repeating murmurs as the echo played tricks again, repeating a hint of the phrase back in low, warping reflections. The cave made the words feel true even when they weren't. Marcus felt the panic surging again, spreading through the group in a second wave. He needed to think, not react. Think. "Shira," he whispered, keeping his voice steady for her sake. "Hold on to me. I'm going to try to move." She hesitated for half a breath, then shifted closer. Her claws slid into the upper seam of his harness, anchoring herself so she would not lose him in the dark. The lead cadet attempted another order, but his voice faltered mid-sentence. The authority he had clung to dissolved completely. The group was breaking down in slow motion, like ice cracking across a frozen lake. Marcus took a careful step forward, relying on sound and memory rather than sight. His foot brushed against stone that sloped downward slightly. His fingers found the wall, smooth in some places, jagged in others. The darkness made every edge feel sharper. "Marcus," Shira breathed, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" "I'm checking the tunnel," he whispered back. "We need to know where we can move." His hand trailed along cold stone. The wall felt damp in certain patches, dry in others, showing signs of airflow and mineral deposits. The ground underfoot grew uneven, split by cracks that would be easy to miss without sight, if someone ran too fast. His mind supplied an image he did not want to see. A cadet tumbling into a deep crevice unseen, vanishing into blackness before anyone could pull him back. "Shira, stay close," he said quietly, "and try to stay calm. We're going to figure this out." Another cadet from the back spoke up suddenly, voice thin and shaking. "I hear water. I hear rushing water." His panic spiked instantly. "We're near an underground river. The floor could give way at any moment." Marcus listened intently. He heard dripping. He heard moist air shifting, but he did not hear rushing water. Still, the cadets around him latched onto the fear and fed it with their own imagination. A second cadet agreed frantically. "Yes, I hear it too." A third wailed, "We're going to get swept away." The sound of armored bodies shuffling backward filled the tunnel, frantic and directionless. Someone tripped. Another fell against the wall with a grunt. A third slammed into a companion, and the two collapsed together. "Stop moving!" the lead cadet shouted, but his command curled into warped echoes and returned as a dozen distorted versions of his own voice, none of which sounded confident. Marcus clenched his teeth. This couldn't continue. The group would destroy itself with panic long before any cave danger found them. He steadied himself, anchoring one hand against the wall and one against Shira's shoulder. Her crest was flattened fully against her head now, a sign of deep fear among her species. "Shira," he whispered, "I need you to breathe with me. Slowly. Just listen." She tried. He could feel the trembling in her arms, the frantic flutter of her lungs. But she focused on him, and little by little, her breathing slowed. Her grip remained tight, but no longer desperate. At least one person was steady. That was a start. A distant thump echoed from somewhere farther down the tunnel, deep and hollow, like a rock falling in a cavern beyond. The sound rolled slowly toward them, lingering far too long. Several cadets whimpered. One whispered that something huge had awakened deeper in the cave. Marcus felt a faint pulse of fear ripple through him, but he forced himself to analyze what he had heard. The sound was too long, too stretched by acoustic distortion. It was likely nothing more than a natural stone shift. But even if it was harmless, he knew this truth. The cadets would not survive long like this. Someone needed to act with clarity. He needed light, any light. And that thought sparked the faintest idea, something he had read once, buried in a geology report about this moon's subterranean ecosystems. A possibility, a risky one, but a real one. He didn't speak yet. The idea was fragile, half-formed in the darkness. And the fear around him was loud, volatile, ready to crush any attempt at calm if he misstepped. But he clung to that spark of thought. Light existed here. He just needed to find it. And he would. Because if he didn't, this darkness would not simply frighten the cadets. It would break them. Marcus stood in the trembling dark with Shira pressed close beside him, her claws buried in the upper seam of his harness. The other cadets continued to shift and mutter in barely controlled panic, their breaths ragged, their steps uncertain. The darkness felt thicker now, as if the cave itself listened to their fear and pulled it tighter around them. Marcus closed his eyes even though it made no difference. The blackness behind his eyelids was identical to the one around him. He needed a way to think, to drown out the muffled cries and the frantic scrambling of boots and claws. Light. He needed light. And somewhere in his memory, a faint spark of knowledge waited to be grasped. He pushed past the stale, cold air in his lungs and dug through the mental catalog of everything he had read about this moon's subterranean ecosystem. He had studied it out of curiosity more than necessity, fascinated by the adaptations of life to nearly lightless environments. As he concentrated, the details returned slowly. Mineral-fed fungi, photosynthetic organisms that did not rely on surface sunlight, bioreactive spores that glowed faintly under chemical agitation. He remembered the description clearly now. Glowing fungi clusters that reacted to warmth or pressure. They grew along damp stone where water seeped through the rock. He needed to find them. "Shira," he whispered, leaning closer so she would not hear the echoes warp his voice. "I'm going to move along the wall. You have to stay with me." She nodded so faintly that he felt it more than heard it. Her grip tightened on his arm, and he shifted forward carefully, sliding one hand along the cold stone. His fingers found a ridge, followed it downward, and traced along the rough surface. He counted each step in his mind, keeping the rhythm steady. He could feel Shira's breath at his shoulder, uneven but more controlled now that she focused on his movements, rather than the darkness swallowing the group. Behind them, the cadets continued to argue, stumble, and gasp. Marcus blocked the noise out. He could not guide all of them blindly. Not yet. Not until he had something to show them. Something real. Something bright enough to challenge the darkness. He knelt, fingers brushing the ground. He felt coarse gravel at first, then smooth patches of mineral deposit where the cave's moisture had evaporated over time. That was promising. Fungi needed water. He shifted farther along, brushing aside thin pebbles. His palm met a damp patch, cool and slick, where condensation gathered. His heart quickened. He leaned in and felt along the wall again. The surface was cooler here, smoother. His hand glided across a thin layer of moisture. And then, there. The faintest texture change. Something soft, something fibrous. He touched it gently. A dim pulse of cold light flickered against his fingertips. Weak, brief, but unmistakable. Shira gasped. "Marcus, was that?" "Yes," he whispered. "I found it." He explored the patch further. The fungi felt like small, sponge-like clusters, rounded and delicate. He cupped one cluster carefully. The glow brightened at his touch, responding to warmth and friction, just as the ecological report had described. The light remained faint at first, barely enough to tease the outline of his own knuckles, but it was a start. Shira whispered, her voice filled with fragile hope. "Can you make it brighter?" "I think so," he answered. He rubbed his thumb gently over one of the clusters. The glow intensified, growing from a dull haze to a soft, steady radiance. It wasn't bright enough to guide all of them through the tunnels, but it illuminated his hand and Shira's trembling fingers clinging to his sleeve. He felt her breath hitch as the faint outline of his face appeared, just a suggestion of features, but enough to prove that the darkness wasn't absolute anymore. Marcus straightened, clutching the luminous cluster carefully. "Help me find more. There should be several patches nearby. The moisture means the colony is spreading." Shira nodded again and released his arm only long enough to place one hand against the wall. She moved with slow, deliberate motions, guided by Marcus's light. The faint glow painted her crest and scales with a muted greenish tint, making her look ethereal in the black cavern. She found another patch within seconds. Marcus reached out and touched it, coaxing its bioluminescence awake. The second cluster lit with a brighter pulse than the first. Behind them, one cadet cried out, startled by the sudden glow. Another shouted that someone had activated a torch. The voices grew louder, almost wild with desperate hope. Marcus turned toward the sounds. Though he could not see the faces, he could hear the frantic breathing. "Stay calm," he called. "I found a light source. Just give us a moment." The cadets surged toward the faint illumination, but Shira hissed sharply at them to keep their distance. Marcus pressed his hand against the wall to steady himself as the sound of shuffling boots and claws approached. The cavern's darkness no longer swallowed every detail. The faint glow allowed him to see flickers of movement, blurred silhouettes, glimmering armor plates, reflections in wide, terrified eyes. A tall figure stumbled close, the lead cadet. His face, though twisted by worry, appeared in dim green tones. "Marcus," he said, voice cracking, "what is that? How did you find it?" "It's fungi," Marcus explained, rubbing another patch to coax more light. "It glows when you warm it or apply pressure. I read about it before we came here." The lead cadet stared at him, disbelief mixing with relief. "You read about cave fungus?" "Yes," Marcus answered simply. "I like geology." Shira let out a soft, trembling laugh, the first sign of genuine relief from any of the alien cadets. More cadets approached, faces painted with the ghostly light. The glow reflected in their wide eyes, and the panic swirling in the tunnel began to settle. Not disappear, but settle into something manageable. Marcus crouched again, gathering clusters of the glowing fungi into his hands. They were squishy, almost gelatinous, and fragile. If he squeezed too hard, the cluster would split, weakening the glow. But handled carefully, the fungi produced a steady, usable light. "We need to make these into torches," he said. "Shira, can you find something to wrap them in? Fabric, a cloth strip, anything porous?" Shira hesitated. "Our uniforms are reinforced fibers. If I tear—" "Just a strip," Marcus said. We need material that can hold the clusters. The lead cadet nodded suddenly. I can help. He reached down and tore a small section from the inner layer of his armor padding, a soft woven material designed for insulation. He handed it to Marcus with shaking hands. Use this. Marcus wrapped the first set of fungi in the cloth. As soon as he tied the ends, the glow became more concentrated, shining through the fibers in a soft, widespread glow. A murmur ran through the cadets. It looks like a lantern. It's actually bright. We can see each other. Marcus handed the glowing bundle to the lead cadet. Hold it steady. Don't drop it. The lead cadet clutched the makeshift lantern with both hands, the light illuminating the sharp planes of his face and the uncertainty in his eyes. But beneath that uncertainty, Marcus saw something else. Renewed determination. Shira leaned closer to Marcus, her voice lowered. We need several of those if we want the group to move. I know, Marcus said, already reaching for more clusters. He collected them as quickly as he could, coaxing each one into glowing. The cadets watched in awed silence as the cave around them shifted from pitch black to a dim, mossy twilight. The fungi responded to movement, growing brighter each time a finger brushed them. Within minutes, Marcus had made 3 glowing bundles. He passed them to the cadets nearest him. Some held them with trembling reverence, as though the faint light was a treasure they had never thought to see again. One younger cadet, a girl with pale membranes and tear-streaked cheeks, approached slowly. Her eyes were still filled with fear, but she stared at the glowing fungi with a kind of shy wonder. Marcus held out a small cluster to her. It's warm, he said gently. Touch it lightly. She reached out, hesitating for a moment before brushing her fingertips across the surface. The fungi flared brighter. Her breath caught. It's beautiful. Marcus managed a faint smile. It is. The glowing light spread through the group, and the oppressive darkness retreated just enough for the cadets to see one another fully. Faces softened from terror into something closer to cautious hope. Marcus stood, rubbing the moisture from his palms onto the stone. His mind was already moving ahead, mapping routes, remembering airflow patterns, estimating where more fungi might grow. This was only the beginning. He had given them light. Now he needed to give them a path. But for the first time since the darkness fell, the cadets were no longer falling apart. They looked to him, not the lead cadet, not the panicked voices, but to him, the human who had found light in a place designed to swallow it. And Marcus understood then that he could not afford to falter. Not now. Not with so many lives depending on what he chose to do next. The moment the cave shifted from suffocating blackness into a dim, moss-green twilight, the cadets clustered closer to Marcus as though his newfound light was a lifeline. The 3 glowing bundles he had fashioned cast long, trembling shadows across the uneven stone walls, revealing the cadets' frightened faces in flickers. The glow was not strong enough to banish the darkness completely, but it pushed it back far enough for the group to regain a sense of space and direction. Marcus raised one of the bundles higher, letting the light spill across the tunnel ahead. The glow seeped into cracks and divots in the walls, illuminating tiny crystals and moisture beads like stars caught halfway between life and mineral. Shira stood just behind Marcus, her crest relaxing slowly as she adjusted to the new level of visibility. Her eyes reflected the soft green light, giving her an almost serene expression, despite the tension still visible in the tight line of her jaw. She stayed close, not out of fear, but out of a fierce protective instinct Marcus had begun to recognize. She was ready to follow him or stop anyone who might interfere now that he had taken control of the situation. The lead cadet, still gripping his glowing bundle with both hands, approached Marcus with badly concealed hesitation. Without the total darkness to hide in, the fear stamped into his face was embarrassingly visible. "What do we do next?" he asked, voice quiet, as if afraid of the cavern listening. Marcus cast the glow forward and let his eyes adjust. The tunnel was still menacing, its ceiling lost in shadows above the narrow halo of greenish light. But at least he could see the ground now, uneven but navigable. "We move," Marcus said. "Slowly. We stay close together. I'll go first, and Shira stays behind me. You take the second light and walk at the group's center. Give the last one to whoever is calm enough to guard the rear." A murmur passed through the cadets, but no one objected. The clarity with which Marcus spoke, the steadiness he radiated, made his words feel more like a plan than an improvisation. The lead cadet looked around nervously before passing the third glowing bundle to a slim girl whose trembling had subsided into a determined stillness. She accepted it with quiet gratitude. Once the light-bearers were positioned, Marcus stepped toward the front. The glow illuminated the first few meters of the tunnel, revealing jagged stone teeth along the walls, glistening veins of mineral streaks, and scattered pebbles that had once seemed harmless, but now looked like potential hazards ready to twist an ankle. He spared a moment to study the airflow again. A faint draft brushed his cheek, cool and steady. It drifted from deeper within the tunnel, not back toward the sealed entrance. If he followed that direction, the air would eventually lead to an opening. Maybe a ventilation shaft, maybe a natural exit, maybe the intended path toward the central chamber. "We follow the airflow," Marcus said softly, more to himself than anyone else. Shira stepped forward. "I trust you," she said. Her voice was steady now, soft but strong in a way that made some of the other cadets stand straighter just from hearing her. Marcus raised the glowing fungi cluster, letting the light spill forward as he ventured deeper. The cadets followed in a shaky but organized line, each one keeping a careful distance to avoid colliding in the narrow space. The green-lit shadows crawled along the walls with every step, alive with movement as the light flickered in Marcus's hands. As they moved, Marcus guided the group around treacherous dips and sudden rises. He pointed out slick stones, warned of protruding ridges, and held the light steady over obstacles so the cadets could step around them. The glow revealed more patches of fungi along the walls, some tiny, others forming long streaks of luminescence that hinted at old water paths. At one such patch, Marcus paused long enough to gather a few small clusters and press them against rough cloth, causing them to emit a brighter glow. The cadets watched in awe as the light intensified. "You are making it look easy," Shira whispered to him with a faint smile. Marcus shook his head. "Nothing about this is easy. I'm just trying not to panic." She let out a soft sound that might have been a laugh if not for the lingering vibrations of fear still hidden under her breath. The group moved deeper still. At times, the tunnel widened, forming small chambers with high ceilings where the light seemed to vanish upward into an endless void. At other times, it narrowed so much that the cadets had to turn sideways to slip through, their armor scraping against stone in ways that made the entire group tense. But Marcus kept the rhythm steady, never letting the pace falter. With each step he took, he learned more about the cave, its breath, its strange acoustics, the way it seemed alive with distant water and shifting stone. At one point, the ground dipped abruptly into what might once have been a shallow basin. The glowing light revealed faint scratches in the stone, claw marks, long and curved. Shira inhaled sharply. "Fauna," she whispered. "Something moves through here." Marcus raised the light to inspect the marks. They were old, worn at the edges. "Not recently," he answered. "If something passed through here, it was a long time ago." The reassurance, though thin, calmed a few cadets enough to move forward again. In the next chamber, a wide fissure split the floor. Marcus approached it slowly, shining the fungi light downward. The crack was deep, but narrow enough to step across if one was careful. He lowered himself, touched the edge, and tested the stability of the stone. When he was satisfied, he stepped over first and turned to help others across. Shira followed him as gracefully as any practiced climber, her scales catching faint gleams of light. The lead cadet hesitated, his legs trembling, but Marcus reached out and pulled him across. The younger cadets crossed next, some nearly tumbling when their nerves faltered. Marcus steadied each one, feeling their hands shake in his grip. He never reprimanded them. He simply guided them calmly, anchoring their fear with his steady presence. Once the entire group crossed, Marcus continued forward. The tunnel sloped upward now, and the airflow grew cooler. That meant progress. He felt the cave opening slightly ahead, not visually, but through the way sound echoed differently, how the air thinned just enough to hint at a larger space. "We're heading toward a chamber," Marcus said. "Stay close." As the group stepped into the wider cavern, the light revealed towering stalagmites rising from the floor like ancient pillars. Some shimmered faintly with mineral deposits, reflecting the green glow in scattered fragments. The scene was hauntingly beautiful. Shira exhaled in quiet wonder, and even the most frightened cadets paused to take in the breathtaking sight. Marcus, however, focused on the center of the chamber. The airflow was stronger here. A faint draft flowed across his face like a cold whisper. He lifted the fungi bundle higher and scanned the cavern walls. There, on one side, narrow rock formations parted just enough to suggest another passage, smaller, tighter, and harder to notice without light. "That's our way forward," he said. But before the cadets could move, a deep resonance echoed across the chamber. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't footsteps. It was stone shifting somewhere in the distance, far enough away not to threaten them directly, but close enough to remind them that the cave was alive and unpredictable. Several cadets tensed, gripping their glowing bundles tighter. Marcus raised his light calmly. "It's just pressure shifting," he assured them. "The cave does that. We're not in danger." No one fully relaxed, but his voice anchored them again. The tension slowly eased enough for the group to follow him toward the narrow passage. Before entering it, Marcus did one more thing. He peeled a bit of cloth from his own sleeve, wrapped one of the fungi clusters around it, and wedged it gently into a crevice beside the entrance. The bundle glowed faintly, marking the chamber behind them. Shira tilted her head. "A trail?" Marcus nodded. "In case we get disoriented." The cadets exchanged glances filled with admiration. None spoke, but their expressions said everything. Marcus wasn't just guiding them. He was thinking several steps ahead, something their panic had prevented them from doing. With the path now lit behind and ahead, Marcus stepped into the narrow passage. The cadets followed, moving in a single file. The walls closed around them again, but now the light softened the claustrophobia. Marcus kept his eyes on the shadows, careful not to miss any detail. The fungi's glow revealed moisture along the walls, suggesting the presence of a small underground stream nearby, maybe part of the central chamber system they were meant to reach. The passage curved left, then right, then dipped in a shallow U-shape. Marcus kept the pace slow enough to ensure no one stumbled, but fast enough to keep panic from creeping back in. The faint rumbling noises grew quieter, replaced by soft dripping water. The air felt fresher. A good sign. "We're getting close," he whispered to Shira. She nodded, her crest lifting slightly in relief. "I hope the others can sense it too." Marcus raised the fungi bundle, letting the green glow spill over the final bend of the passage. Whatever lay beyond that bend would determine the next stage of their survival. But one thing was certain. The cadets no longer feared the darkness the same way, because Marcus had given them light, and now that light would lead them into whatever awaited next. As Marcus stepped around the bend, the green glow of the fungi revealed a broad cavern ahead, larger than any he had yet encountered. The ceiling arched far overhead, disappearing into an immense darkness that trembled faintly with shifting stone. The cavern air tasted cleaner than the narrow passage behind them, touched by a faint mineral sharpness that reminded Marcus of high mountain air after rainfall. The faint glow from his bundle of fungi captured glimmers of moisture that clung to the stalactites like suspended stars. Shira inhaled deeply behind him, and relief softened her posture. "This is it," she whispered. This feels closer to the surface. Marcus agreed. The air moved in a slow, steady rhythm, pulling inward and outward like the breath of some sleeping giant. A natural airflow of this kind meant only one thing: an exit existed somewhere ahead. The cadets behind Shira filtered into the cavern, their glowing bundles creating a scattered constellation of pale green light. The cavern walls reflected the glow in uneven patches, brightening the space enough that the panicked tension finally began to unravel from their rigid bodies. Several cadets straightened their spines, others released trembling breaths, and one let out a broken sound of relief that ended in a half-sob. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility ease slightly. His plan had carried them through the worst of the darkness. He lifted his fungi bundle higher and walked toward the center of the cavern. As he moved deeper, he found a raised platform of stone, likely formed by an ancient mineral deposit. Upon it lay a single metallic box, its surface tarnished with age, but still recognizable. A beacon container, just as the instructors had described in the trial briefing. The lead cadet approached slowly, looking as though his legs might give way beneath him. His eyes widened at the sight of the box. "You found it," he said, voice hoarse with disbelief. "Marcus, you actually found the objective." Marcus touched the side of the box. The metal responded with a low vibration. It was a simple design, meant to be carried with two hands, and contained the beacon that signified a completed objective. He grabbed the handle and lifted it carefully. The weight was reassuring, solid, purposeful. "We should activate it once we're closer to the exit," he said. "The signal will guide the instructors to our location." Shira brushed her fingers over the edge of the platform. "Where do we go from here?" Marcus turned toward the strongest flow of air. The draft came from a passage on the far right side of the cavern, a narrow opening shaped by water erosion, its entrance jagged. He held his glowing bundle toward it. The faint breeze brushing against his face grew colder and sharper. That was exactly what he needed to feel. "This way," he said. The cadets fell into formation, calmer now, guided by purpose instead of fear. Marcus led them toward the narrow exit passage, stepping over smooth rock formations and around puddles of cold water that reflected swirling echoes of green light. The cavern behind them quickly sank back into silence, broken only by the faint hum of the beacon box in Marcus's hands. The passage they entered wound upward in a series of steep inclines. At one point, the stone narrowed so much that the cadets had to turn sideways again. But unlike before, the claustrophobia did not shake them into panic. The soft green glow from the fungi bundles illuminated each step, and Marcus's steady pace reassured them that this was no longer a blind march into terror. The air continued to cool as they climbed. Marcus felt it across his cheeks, down his throat. His heart thudded with anticipation. The surface was close, very close. When they rounded a corner, a faint shimmer appeared along the stone floor, brighter than any fungal glow. Marcus stopped abruptly, stunned. The cadets behind him nearly collided into Shira before she raised a hand for silence. Marcus stepped forward, the light from his fungi bundle merging with the faint luminescence on the ground. It was not fungi. It was daylight. A soft, pale beam drifted down from above, slipping through a narrow crack in the ceiling. Dust motes drifted lazily in the ray, swirling in elegant spirals as if celebrating the revelation. Marcus stepped beneath it, letting the beam fall across his face. Warmth touched his skin. Real warmth. The cadets behind him gasped softly. One whispered, "The surface. We're close enough to see it." Marcus nodded. "We follow the light." The narrow beam revealed a sloped path carved by centuries of dripping water. The incline was steeper here, but stable. Marcus guided Shira first, then the lead cadet, then the rest of the group. The beam grew brighter with each step, until Marcus turned another corner and found himself staring at a jagged opening in the ceiling of rock, an opening large enough for a cadet to pass through one at a time. Above it, Marcus could see the night sky. Stars glittered like ice shards scattered across velvet black. A cold wind brushed his face. He felt like he could float. "We're out," he said softly. "We actually made it." The cadets erupted into soft cheers. Some laughed, some cried, some dropped to their knees in exhausted relief. Shira pressed her palms against the stone wall and bowed her head, releasing the tension she had held rigid within her since the darkness consumed them. Marcus climbed first, gripping the stone edges and hauling himself upward. The cold wind strengthened as he neared the surface, carrying scents of pine resin and open sky. He emerged into a shallow gorge that cut across the moon's rocky landscape. Starlight cast pale shadows across the ground, and thin clouds drifted lazily overhead. He turned back to help Shira climb out, grasping her wrist and pulling her onto solid stone. She exhaled shakily, then stepped aside so the next cadet could emerge. Marcus helped each one by one, until the entire group stood free beneath the open sky. The glowing fungi bundles flickered in the wind, their light fading slightly against the starlight, but no one seemed to mind. The cadets clung to each other, to the cold air, to the freedom above ground. Marcus set the beacon box on the ground and flipped the activation switch. The device released a sharp, rising hum, followed by a bright pulse that shot upward. A pillar of light pierced the night sky like a silent flare. Moments later, the distant whir of instructor drones echoed across the gorge, a sure sign that help was already on the way. The lead cadet approached Marcus, his expression earnest. "You saved us," he said quietly, with no hesitation or false bravado. "Without you, we would have broken apart in that darkness." Marcus shook his head. "I didn't do it alone. All of you followed me. Shira helped me keep the group together, and everyone held on long enough to escape." Shira stepped forward, her eyes steady. "You guided us when no one else could. That matters more than you think." Marcus met her gaze. The admiration in her eyes was gentle, warm, and deeply sincere. As the instructor drones descended, illuminating the gorge in sweeping beams of light, the cadets straightened in proud formation, exhausted, bruised, shaken, but unified, alive. An instructor in formal armor stepped forward from the lead drone, her expression unreadable beneath the harsh white light. She surveyed the cadets, then turned her gaze to Marcus. A faint tilt of her head conveyed approval before she spoke. "This trial was meant to challenge adaptability and leadership," she said. "Few cadet groups have demonstrated this level of resilience. The beacon is retrieved, and every cadet stands accounted for. Well done." The wind rustled the rocky terrain, and the stars shimmered like scattered crystals overhead. Marcus felt the cold air fill his lungs and knew, with quiet certainty, that something had changed within him, and within every cadet who now stood beneath the open sky. They had entered the cave as individuals terrified of the darkness. They left it as a united team, carrying the memory of a human who brought light into the shadows. And long after the fungi's glow faded, the lesson remained. Courage is contagious. And sometimes, one spark of light is enough to lead an entire group out of the deepest darkness.